Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nicholas Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification, and validation, as well as CMC. We offer 3 different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to thefdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. Today, I am speaking with Divya Gowdar. Hi, Divya. How are you today?
Hi, Nick. Good morning. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely.
So before we jump into our topic for today, could you just introduce yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Great to be here. Hi, everyone. Divya Gowdar. So I am a quality and a regulatory professional. I've been in the medical device and combination product industry over about 20 years now, and I really enjoy this industry because I get to make a lot of difference in the quality of the patient's life. And I also have my own firm. After spending a lot of time in the corporate industry, I decided to kind of go on my own. And I am the owner of the consulting firm NubGenix Consulting. And NubGenix is basically engaged in providing the quality and regulatory support for the medical device and combination product industries. So thank you, Nick, again for having me here, and very happy to share my experience with you here.
Okay, excellent. So the topic is pitfalls and lessons learned from inspection readiness and audit execution. So I think where we're going to start for today is how would you identify when an organization needs to engage in an inspection readiness program?
Yeah, sure. So again, I've done a lot of audits in my experience, and this is all like today the discussion will be pretty much based on my personal experience, and I'm pretty sure you have a lot of experience under your belt too, so there'll be a great discussion. So one of the things that I always feel is, during the audit, and this has been my personal experience, is when the organizations kind of scurries around a lot. Like, for example, if a simple documentation that's like a quality manual or your documentation structure, SOP, if that takes like at least more than 20, 30 minutes to retrieve it, then to me, that's just seems like that's not right, because those are some of the readily available documents which shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes to retrieve, right? So from my experience, if like, we had that where the SMEs who came in the room were not prepared, or we didn't know like who the right SMEs is, particularly after like a merger and an acquisition where the two QMS are merged, and now we don't know if the auditor asked for a complaint management SOP, like we did not know whether to give the legacy organization or the acquired organization. So things like that put us into a lot of these sticky situations. And that has been my personal experience, right? So if you're scurrying around a lot of these examples that I just shared, that's truly when I feel like you need that inspection readiness program, and that's all kind of based on my experience with other clients,
Yeah, so that's a good indicator that if it's taking that long to get that documentation, then you should probably look toward investing in such a program to get you prepared for an inspection, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So what would putting a program like this look like?
Yeah, yeah. So again, this is how I have done it, and I'm pretty sure I would like to kind of get your point of view as well. So what I have done is, kind of use the industry as your best practice model and platform. One of the things that we have done is uh, do a playbook, right? Like we did a playbook, which is kind of like, okay, this is how it should happen when the FDA auditor or when an auditor walks in your site, who is the point of contact, who greets them, who escorts them, and once they are in the room, like, who are the stakeholders that get involved, and how should your front room look like, your back room look like, and then after you're set up, like, who are the SMEs, identify the SMEs from possibility every single quality system element, because you never know which SME would be brought into the room, and prepare them, like do the mock interviews with the SMEs, have your master list of documents ready and know where these documents are, whether they are in the electronic systems or whether they are like a hard binder, know all those things and prepare for our audit logistics. Like, make sure your printers are ready, your people are ready, your auditees are ready, and all those things, so we had a playbook really essentially, and we trained every stakeholder in that playbook and say, this is how we're going to do. And then obviously do the mock inspections using that playbook to see if you have still created any gaps in that playbook.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to hear your experience on that. Like, how have you done in the past?
Very similar. I call it a checklist as opposed to a playbook, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the challenges that people come into when they're engaging in a solution like this is they don't know what they don't know,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think really what they're hoping to get at the end of the day is peace of mind. So that's really what they're paying for, is that peace of mind. So when you come in and you have a checklist or a playbook and you say, look, these are all of the things that we're going to go through. And after we go through and there's a check mark next to all of these and everybody is trained on and understands all of these different aspects, then you know that you're going to have the peace of mind that once you're inspected, you're going to be prepared and ready to go through that and have a successful inspection. So it's really, being thorough in preparing the site for that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so what's your experience been in implementing these types of programs?
Yeah, again, that's we have done this at a couple of clients, and I want to say like one of my experiences is when it was kind of a lesson learned hard way, is we had all these internal audits uh, that we were doing, and then we were not ready, and we started kind of scurrying around. Oh God, what to do? Like, we don't have the master list of documents. We don't know who is who. So from that lessons learned, the next few months, like we had a lot of audit schedule. Like the client had an ISO audit, the 13485 certification audit, and then the MDR regulations, the new EU MDR regulations were coming into play. So we had that audit also scheduled with the client. So this internal audit was like truly like an eye opener, and that kind of gave us an instigation to start working on such a program. So that's exactly what we did, is we started creating all these procedures in place, like how to do an external audit management inspection. And then we created this master list of documents, and it was a great database that we created, wherein we said, okay, these are the procedures, these are the SMEs, and we also in fact made like a primary SME and a secondary SME, because of course everyone takes vacations,
Yeah.
everyone falls sick.
Yeah.
So it was kind of very well thought, like a full-blown backup procedure. Like if the SMEs are not there, who else can support that? If we lost the EQMS access, what else can we do? Like we had a physical SOPs printed, a binder. So it was a very well thought of solution. And it was great to have that robust and steady system, because that really helped us to pass with flying colors, like those ISO and MDR audits. So it was a very fun project actually.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is not only do you have to understand the different components of the inspection, but planning for or mitigating your risk against it, just like you referred to. What's plan B if plan A fails or things go down?
Yeah, yeah,
People get
absolutely.
sick,
Yeah,
get hit
yeah.
by a bus, the proverbial bus or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and audit never goes the way you plan. That's been my experience always.
Hmm.
There's always like these surprises that come in. But at least you're less surprised if you have a backup plan, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the red flags that can come up while you're assisting these companies. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to share that because a lot of the organizations, like you mentioned early in the podcast, like you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's what I feel like a lot of organizations are in that space. And as I like to share my personal experience, so this was the audit that I kind of did last year where stepping into this audit, like I kind of knew there might be few issues, but not like a red flags per se. The only reason is because, this company was just stepping into the medical device combination product space fairly recently. And they were kind of, their hands were in both the industries, like, in the automotive industry and in the medical device combination product industry. So when I kind of walked in, um, I knew their regulations and the systems may not be that strong. But unfortunately, I kind of saw a lot of red flags. For example, like, I started asking them about their processes, like, how you validate the processes and show me your risk management or process FMEA for this process. And they were actually looking at me as if I had two horns. I was surprised. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, what is a process FMEA and all that? And I was like, okay, that's definitely a red flag for me, because if you're in the medical device combination product industry and you don't know a process FMEA and a process validation, that's definitely a big trouble, right? So yeah, unfortunately, they were not able to show me their process validation reports, the OQ, IQ, PQs, the PFMEA, or even like the process fault trees, and anything like that. So that was kind of right there, and then it was a huge red flag for me, right? So things like that, when you step in the audit and as big as this one. Um, and it's so maybe I want to kind of get your thoughts on that. Like for me, it doesn't take a long time. Like the first day of the audit, like just couple of hours into it, like if the organization is kind of well built or if there are a couple of red flags. Like it's very easy to figure out in the first few hours of the audit. I don't know, like how you felt like based on your auditing experience.
Well, I know a lot about auditing. I've never actually conducted an audit, but having done this run the organization for 17 years, I absorb a lot through osmosis, right?
Sure.
And one of the things that I've come to learn is, you know, perception is reality, right? And first impressions kind of speak to how the whole audit's going to go. So,
Mm-hmm.
are there empty boxes in the lobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to kind of speak to how do they feel about orderliness, right? And so, you definitely want to be on your proverbial P's and Q's, make sure the lobby is clean, make sure that you're prepared to welcome them, yeah, and take care of things in that manner.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is what I found. And then the other thing that I've come to learn is when an auditor is or an investigator is taking a look in an area and they're seeing things and they look compliant at a certain point, they're going to feel satisfied and they're going to move on. The more they distrust the organization and their compliance, the more they're going to want to dig and the more they're going to want to stay, right? So your goal as the firm that's being audited is to provide them with a level of confidence that you are compliant. And so you want to across everything that you can provide that level of comfort that you're orderly and so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree with you that the perception is reality. And I honestly agree with you that because once you have a very great procedure in the system, you're like, well, they have a pretty good system, like kind of move on from there. But if you feel like their SOP is not strong enough, like that is when it instigates me to start looking at their records and see like, well, if your SOP is not so strong, like, what about your records? You're right, like you kind of start digging into that, and that's when you're like, okay, this is kind of a red flag, yeah, I
Hmm.
agree with you.
Now, with that firm that you were referring to earlier, what was the outcome?
So we are still working with them because this was like late last year that we did the audit. So they're trying to implement the solutions. At least like kind of, if not process validation, we are kind of telling them you need to do process verification at the least. So it is being a little challenging to work with them because they're with a very like automotive mindset, and for them to kind of really drag them into the medical device combination product space. So we are still working with them. So hopefully they'll come around. Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the common gaps that you're finding in QMS as you're working with different clients?
Yeah, sure. So since we are on the topic of the combination products, this and these are like my pet peeves. I don't have to work hard to find them. So one of the things that I don't know if you're familiar, like FDA came up with the combination product regulations like back in 2006, 2007.
Yep.
And that's when like all these pharmaceutical companies were like, I wouldn't say in trouble, but they were like sort of, oh God, like we now not only have to comply with the drug regulations, but
Right.
we also have to comply with the
210,
device.
211, and 820.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Right, right. So that is when we saw a lot of gaps in that area. And even today, like one of the key areas that we see gaps is the design controls and the DHFs of the products.
Right.
And it is very unfortunate that a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are not aware of the device regulations. And I know like they're trying to hire these device SMEs, and a lot of them have actually come pretty far from 2007. But unfortunately, even today, like that's one of the buckets where I feel there's a lot of gaps still. That one, and this is a low-hanging fruit. Like I know if I go there, I can definitely find a gap. Not from the perspective of policing the organization, from the perspective of really we want to add value to the client here by letting them know this is one of the area where FDA also focuses on is the supplier management. And this is where I've seen the gaps where either the procedures are not aligning with the regulations, or the procedures are actually great, like they align with the regulations, but when we actually look at the records of the suppliers, like how they're qualified, how they're monitored periodically, unfortunately the gaps exist there. Like they qualify and then they just leave them as a forgotten child. And but as the issues come up on the surface, like there is really no monitoring of these suppliers. So that's one of the areas where I have seen, like, you won't believe it, like 90% of the audits that I actually find gaps in the supplier management, which is very unfortunate. But as an auditor, it's I don't want to say a treat, but kind of like it's very easy to find the gaps in that area, and that's where I work with the client, and I try to tell them this has to be the focus of your, remediation or gap analysis.
Now, let me see if I understood you correctly. Did you say the firms that you were assisting, they qualified their supplier and then they didn't have an ongoing audit program with their suppliers?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. One, either they did not have a very good qualification program for the suppliers. That was the gap. Or the second gap is either they had the program and they just did the initial qualification.
And then there was
And
no
then
follow-up?
exactly, there was no like monitoring or follow-up. Yeah.
And can you riddle me this? How long was the gap that you saw between initial qualification and the time period that you came into contact with that qualification report?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sometimes it was as bad as like 10 years, like
Oh
20.
my God.
Yeah, like one of the equality agreements that I saw was probably from 2018. It was never updated. So, yeah,
And there was no
it's
supplier audit program in place.
no.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So what is the supplier doing? I mean, as long as they're getting, if they're doing incoming inspections, if they don't have issues, that's great, right? But how are they evaluating that, and all that is not
Right.
in place. Yeah.
Well, supplier qualification program is obviously very important in following and making sure that you're auditing these suppliers once every year, 2 years, or depending on what makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So what advice would you give to the audience as it pertains to a supplier qualification program?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm very happy and glad to share this from my personal experience. So again, I had worked with a lot of clients, and I would like to kind of share the experience of what we did. One of the areas where it's always, uh, like I said, it's a forgotten child, it is the difference of qualification between an R&D supplier and a full-blown commercial supplier, right? So this is a lesson learned and kind of fingers burned, because what we did with the client is, like, there is a lot of this great R&D supplier where they were able to make the engineering samples, they were able to do the design verification samples, and etc. But when the time actually comes to do your full-blown production transfer, high volume manufacturing, they really did not have those controls, those production controls, and in fact the capability infrastructure and all those things wasn't there in place, right? So so that's one of the key things that I start with my client is there is no regulatory requirement for you to have a qualification program for the design and development suppliers, because FDA mainly focuses on commercialization of the suppliers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you do not have that in the long run, if you go and qualify the supplier very late in the game when all of your design and development efforts is completed, there is a chance that you may find an issue which will potentially have you go back and redo everything. Like, if that supplier is not capable of, you may have to change the manufacturing process, or you may have to change the supplier overall, which now impacts your regulatory submissions and whatnot. Like, obviously your timeline, commercializations, etc. Right? So I always feel like it's one of those neglected areas, and that's where I start with my client, is always telling them, make sure, even though it's not like a full-blown qualification program, have some limited qualification program for your suppliers, for your design and development suppliers, and then have a full-blown qualification for your um, commercialization suppliers. So that was a key lessons learned, and that's how I always start with my client. And then obviously for the commercialization, we, based on the risk, like you indicated, depending on high risk or a low risk supplier, you would implement whether you need an audit, whether you need an agreement, what are the things that you really need for a high risk versus a low risk supplier, and make sure you're monitoring them like whatever your organization requirement is, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, etc. Right? So that is how I kind of work with my clients to make sure they have a very robust program in place.
Yep. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, this is really good information. Before we close, were there any other pieces of advice that you wanted to leave the audience with?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, I always work with my clients from a perspective of what value I can add to their organization, and I'm always happy to help them. So just as a closing remark, what I would like to say is for the audit execution, inspection readiness, overall, the key thing is plan, do, check, act. This is a very common tool. I'm sure, Nick, you've heard about this tool as well. Such a simple tool, but so effective. You plan the whole strategy around how do you want to manage your QMS, how do you want to manage your audit inspection readiness, and then you execute the plan. And like I said, as easy as supplier monitoring, you kind of monitor your own program, right? Like every quarterly or for that matter, every year, kind of monitor your program, see if there is any gaps in the program, take that as action items and kind of do it as a cycle to make sure your inspection readiness program is pretty strong. And this could be used not only just for the inspection readiness, for any quality management system element that you want to have a very robust state-of-the-art program. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Divya. I really appreciate your insight. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you haven't already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast. And follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, and or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see y'all next time.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.